Hi, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Creighton Show. Today, we're going back to a place that I used to live, Cleveland, Ohio. We're not getting ready to interview LeBron James. We're going to interview a beautiful young lady that is literally blowing up all over the Cleveland area with podcasts, with a radio show, with her own practice dealing with emotional damaged individuals. When she talked to me off camera, we was doing like a pre-interview. It was amazing how when you're talking to somebody that you have a lot of similarities in your stories and your life's journey. Today on the show, we're going to let her explain the who, what, where, and why all of these things that she's creating in the Cleveland, Ohio area is important not only to people of color, but just people in general, because we all are one fragment away from having a common thread. I'd like to welcome to the show. Let me get her name correct, because she's the only one I know with this name, and I've been practicing this name for quite some time. Aqueelah Wheatley to the
Yes,
show.
you got it.
Aquila, I don't know how many times I'm gonna say this name. I'm gonna say it until it just rolls off of my tongue. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let's tell the viewers a little bit about you before we get into all of the things that you're providing, not only for the Cleveland area, but really the world with the power of the internet.
Absolutely. So my name, as you said, wonderfully, right,
Yeah.
is Aqueelah Wheatley, and I born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I have a practice in Cleveland Heights called Supportive Advice. I also have a podcast called Supportive Advice Live that airs on Thursdays, and I have a new radio show called Damage Control
Wow.
on yeah, right. On Cleveland's 95.9 FM WOVU.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a marriage and family therapist. And I always tell people whether or not I ever got a degree, I was always going to be a therapist.
Right.
I was just born, into that, being that counselor role, in my family and with
Wait
my
a
friends.
minute. Wait a minute. What do you mean you was born into it? How does that happen? Your mom and dad? What do you mean you was born into it?
Well, everybody says that, and I don't know exactly how true this is, but a lot of people say that individuals that go into therapy, they do so because they have personal understanding of trauma or dysfunction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I could see the things that were missing within my family, and I could relate to others who also in the community who also had these things going and being able to counsel them and come up with problem solving solutions for them. I remember being 7 years old, talking to adults about how to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's just who I am.
Mm-hmm. So were you saying when you say you was at 7 years old, you was teaching them how to talk to each other. So in your household, were there any signs of abnormalities like dysfunction, like argumental stuff, like were there things going on in your house? Because a lot of people say you're. I agree 100% with that. The trauma. Were there any trauma related stuff in your house?
In all honesty, I think that we all have something. That's what I always say. We all have
Mm-hmm.
some form of trauma. But absolutely, me just like so many others grew up without my dad, in a home, lived in a home with two other generations of, African American women, where there was my grandmother and my mom there, and when you have two strong black women in a home, oh, it's gonna be it's gonna be
Hey,
some
I grew up with sisters. I know, and a grandmother. I knew the estrogen was high up in that bad boy, man. I already knew. So what was that like for you? Because I never really asked my sisters what it was like to grow up in a household with a strong uh, uh, grandmother. My mother unfortunately died when I was young, so I was Like
Oh,
most, we
wow.
went to go stay with the grandmother. And my grandmother told me something that was really profound. I didn't get in trouble a lot like my sister. She was really hard on my sisters. And I remember my sister saying, "Why you ain't never hard on Andre?" I said, "Because he's a boy. You know, we expect him to make crazy mistakes, but you're a girl. Your mistakes can, if you do one thing, it can like really torment you." What were some of the values and some of the things that happened in your household with all these strong women? But then, what were some of the things that you was like, maybe I didn't need to know that part?
I mean, there's always things where you say maybe I didn't need
Yeah,
I didn't need that, but I think that in the long run you understand that you do, and it's interesting that you stated that your mom, or I mean, I apologize, your grandmother was easier on you because everybody makes mistakes. That's not gender specific.
right.
Everybody's going to go out, everybody's going to make mistakes, everybody's going to learn, and hopefully those mistakes are going to make you stronger.
Mm-hmm.
As far as living in a house with very strong women, my grandmother, absolutely a strong woman, a single mother. My mother was absolutely a strong woman, also single mother, which brings me to a point of hyper independence, right? You learn how to depend on yourself. You learn how to both be able to fix a car, or change a tire, and you also have to learn how to be soft, cook, clean, all those other things, right? Because at some point you learn, when you're in a house and there is no father present, whether you're African American, Latino, or Caucasian, that you can't depend on that gender. Now, is that true? No, of course not, but that's just what you learn from a generalized perspective.
Mm-hmm. Some people would say that's, and I hate using this word,
Mhm.
generational stigma or generational curse. What was, as somebody that deals with family trauma and marriage and so forth, would this even be considered a generational curse, so to speak? That you hear this so often, more prevalent. It's more micro focus on on our culture than it is anybody else's culture. But the more that it becomes people have getting a becoming having a platform, we see that this is touching everybody. It's just not
Yes.
stigma on us. You know, white people, Latinos. I don't see it so much in the Asian, like the Chinese structure, but I see it everywhere else. What's your take on that?
I think that you hit the nail absolutely on the head. As a marriage and family therapist, I don't just talk to African American families, right? I have a diverse clientele. And yes, it hits us all. There are definitely women that are Caucasian, Latino, African American, that have grown up without their father,
Mm-hmm.
who have seen, either the struggle that their mother had, or lived in a generational home, where, or a multi-generational home is what I meant to say, where there's a mother, a grandmother, maybe a great grandmother, and it just goes down the line that way. And I don't consider that a curse.
Okay,
I do, however, consider that a learned behavior
explain
of
that
hyper
more.
independent.
Explain that a little bit more when you say a learned behavior. You mean from generation to generation?
Hmm.
How do we
Absolutely.
how do we break that? You know, because I know I'm throwing you a lot of shit right now, but
Oh
it's
no, it's cool. This is what
yeah.
I do.
Okay, we provide information with this show and resources, but I'm not afraid to say what people may be afraid of. Why is it
Okay.
that we see cultures like the um, sometimes the Latinos or the Mexican communities, we see it very strong family ties when it comes to the Oriental community and a little bit on the Asian. Why is it so difficulties in our generation and somewhat the generations that are now becoming more polarized? Why they don't have that problem and we do?
I mean, in all honesty, is not to say that Asians in general don't have that problem, because there are Americanized Asians, right, that are single parents. So it's something that we think of as far as we relate to the culture and the tradition, right? But we're not looking at the fact that there are Americanized Asian families where there is just one mother in the
Maybe it's
household.
just not
It's
as
everybody,
polarized as much with them than it is with us because we've been here for
right?
quite some time. Um,
Exactly.
what was it like for you growing up? With your father or a male role model in the house, and then from a therapist standpoint, what kind of effect does that have on both male and female siblings growing up into adulthood?
So my dad, he wasn't in the house, right? So I had my mom and I had my grandmother, and they were both very strong influences for me. I think the way that it affected me was me getting to a point where I was trying to overcome needing that male figure, right? And so it got to a point where it was almost as if the goal was to get to a point where you were so self-reliant physically and emotionally that you didn't need that part. You almost kind of rejected that part because that part had rejected you.
Mm,
And so you see that a lot in the culture, because once you're rejected in that way or someone's not covering you in that way, it's no longer safe to need them. But instead of just realizing it was that person and that person only, and then understanding their particular situation and kind of how they got to be how they are through the
mm.
exoneration process, we generalize it and it becomes hard to trust males in general.
Does this? I'm just throwing a hypothesis.
Sure.
Could this be the reason for such terminology as alpha females that now didn't have the male role model who gets a job, who gets in relationships, doesn't know how to go, not to, forgot what it's like to be a woman, so to speak. And then does this also relate to when you have a female who has a male in the house, the male grows up, and all of a sudden he can't become detached from the mother like the movie Baby Boy? You know,
Mm.
what's that? What's your theory on that?
So, as it relates to families, just in general, from a systemic point of view, there is the parental system and then there is the child subsystem, right? So, anytime there is a missing parent in the parental system, the eldest child, whether boy or girl, is going to migrate up here. They're going to become parentified. If there's other siblings, they're going to start taking care of the other siblings with the parent, and if it's just them, they become more like a partner than a child. And so, what you'll see in that situation, whether male or female, it makes the differentiation process harder. And that is the process where we find out who we are, we find our own values, we leave the house, right? Because now we feel like we have this responsibility to the home, and as though we're abandoning our parent if we were to leave.
But I've seen situations where 40-year-old men
Mhm.
still are attached to the womb of their mom. And this is their excuse. I'm taking care of my mom. I'm thinking, how are
Yes.
you taking care of your mom if your mom or your father have been taking care of themselves? You know what I mean? And you haven't left the nest. That has always baffled me.
But that's not how they see it, because you have if you look at it from, again, the perspective I provided,
Hmm.
where there is the parental subsystem and there is the parental system and the child subsystem. If I'm a child
Hmm.
and I migrate up to the parental system, I now see myself as my parents' partner. I don't see myself as my parents' child.
Wow.
So I'm helping them with everything, whether it's raising siblings, whether it's, going to the grocery store, getting a job to bring in extra money, whatever way that I'm parentified, I'm a part of the system that way. So when I think about leaving, no, I can't leave. I have to take care of my mom. I have to take care of my dad. I'm their partner. They don't have anybody but me, right? That becomes the mindset that keeps them from differentiating.
How dangerous is that for both sides of the table?
It's dangerous is a strong word, but I will say stunting.
Okay.
It's very stunting because it creates a scenario that really disallows the parent from ever being able to have a successful relationship with a partner, because that child is always fighting whomever comes in
Territorial.
for this position. Yes,
Okay.
yes. So it becomes stunting for the parent, but it also becomes stunting to the child who then grows up, right? Because now they feel attached to the system. They don't feel like they can leave. So that means that they're not going off and having their own lives and creating their own families. They're not leaving in Cleveland.
Right.
They're not leaving in Cleveland. And so it messes up the trajectory of legacy.
How widespread is this issue, and is it designated to one particular culture, or is it universal?
It's universal. It's universal. Absolutely. Systemic roles are universal.
Okay.
They're not um cultural at all.
Mm-hmm.
Now there might be some cultural aspects to them, which you mentioned before in the Asian culture and the tradition, and
Mm-hmm.
how you don't see as many as far as individuals in Asia
Right.
having these issues. But once they come over to the US and you get like 3 or 4 generations out, you see them having just the same type of issues as we did or as we do, because the traditions change.
Let's go back a minute, and I first want to thank you for really taking time to come on the show and educate us and spread this information. We talked about something that I am personally working on, which is a show designed around the women theory of women becoming more of the alphas
Mm.
versus, I don't even know if there is a verse, but just to say alphas. What's your take on that? Because here's you're a female who grew up without the father in the house. How does that even take place, and how does it affect a relationship? Because I shared with you a little bit about the relationship I had, where the first thing that female told me was, "Are you upset about the amount of money that I make?" Because my last relationship, it was intimidating. I'm thinking, what kind of people have you been dating that would even be a factor? Because when you have when you're a couple, you combine resources to build generational wealth. What's your take on all that in perspective?
My take on that is you have to see that to be able to model that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't seen anyone come in and assist or combine, then that's not what you know. You
I
know
get you.
how to do things for yourself. You know how to build things for yourself. You know how to not need someone,
Mm-hmm.
right? You've seen individuals disappoint you or whatever the case may be, but you haven't seen that combination. So that's foreign. That's like speaking a foreign language to someone
Mm-hmm.
if they've not seen that model in their own household.
When how do we change that? Like, how do you come at a female and say, you know, you might be a little too strong, because you're dealing with married couples, and I'm pretty sure you get that all the time, and that's becoming really polarized now. That you've seen a lot of women not understanding why they are in that situation that they're in, and how do they get out of being this. How do you? This is what I used to tell my ex: leave your work at home. I don't care if you're a CEO. Leave it at home. When you come to the door, that's work. That's be a couple. Give me your insight on that.
I think it's important to have a clear definition of what it means to be a couple, right? Because a strong woman can be just that with a strong man, right? There is nothing, well, there's the Bible and things like that, but there is nothing in this culture at this point saying that you both can't be strong. One has to come underneath the other. That's not necessarily true. There's alpha females, there's also alpha males, right? And it's about being able to be intentional in your interactions, knowing how to compromise, and being willing to work towards a combined goal versus one person falling under the goal of someone else.
What do you see mostly with people coming to you now when they deal with problems? What are the four number one problems when it comes to uh, emotional what's the word I want to use? Not emotionally drained, emotionally sabotaged.
I I want to say I don't see a lot of emotionally sabotaged individuals, but if you're talking about individuals that may have been through trauma, that I do see a lot,
Yeah.
right? In relationships, money is a big thing,
Is that
right?
number one?
Yep, that's number one. Money is a big thing. Communication is a huge thing where people just aren't hearing each other, right? They get to this point where they have so much animosity and contention. They're not even hearing what the other person is saying, and then you have intimacy, a lack of physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, experiential intimacy within a relationship, which is causing a lot of distance, which is then causing a lot of anxiety. You also have infidelity, which is something I see a lot of too.
Let's go back to all three of those. What if you have the money? What if you have all the key ingredients, but there's still something in that thing that's causing disruption? What is usually the last resource of that when everything seems to be going together? Out of those categories, which is the last thread that basically they're missing?
So I just want to clarify, when I say money, it doesn't mean lack of, right? But a lot of times people relate money to power within a relationship. So if you have two individuals that are both making a good amount of money and they're both contributing, they're having this power struggle because they're waiting for the other person to either bend or fall underneath versus being able to see each other as equally valuable to the whole picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's mostly what I see. It becomes a power struggle when there's two individuals that are both bringing adequately to the table, and then they're trying to also follow these traditions of, well, a man does this, or these gender roles, a man does this and a woman does that, and then it goes all haywire because the woman is saying, okay, well, I make a lot of money too, or I make as much money as you do. Why do I have to come home and cook and clean? Why can't you come home and cook and clean? And the same for, for the guy. The guy is like, okay, well, I'm out here and I'm doing all of this, but it seems like you don't care, or like you don't need it or appreciate it because you have the money as well. So I feel like I'm losing value in this relationship. I don't know how else to show up in a valuable way if it's not financial. And so you see that a lot in relationships. And that's something that I help them work through.
When you're dealing with issues like that, what do you see happening with the younger generations that are coming up? And are you seeing younger an increase in younger individuals that are coming in with uh, these same type of issues?
Absolutely. I see a lot of, younger couples that come in for either premarital counseling or just counseling, and they're not, in a place of, about to be married or engaged or whatnot, and people that are married. I see people come in all the time and they've established themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the other partner has established this themselves, which is what you want, right? They know who they are, they respect who they are, they love themselves, and then they're trying to combine their whole self with this other whole self, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how can we make this one vision?
Mm-hmm.
And so that takes a lot of compromise, because it's important to understand that compromising isn't weak, right? And it's something that is supposed to be done by both parties throughout the relationship. I always tell individuals, I ask them, what is your goal, right? Because if your goal is to get back to a great place in the relationship, then anything outside of doing things that move you towards that goal should be easily dismissed. But if your goal is to show that you have more value in a relationship, then I don't know how that's going to get you guys to a good place, right?
Hmm.
So it's all about trying to figure out what the person's or what the couple's goal actually is, and then morphing it into something that works for both of them.
You shared something during the pre-interview, your quest to bring strong awareness to people of color. Explain that a little bit to the viewers.
Absolutely. I grew up, like I said, in Cleveland in predominantly African American neighborhoods. And one thing that I know is that therapy was something that was very much looked down upon. First of all, it was called a Caucasian thing. Oh, that only they do that. Only they can afford that. So it wasn't
Yeah,
even something that we even
we didn't
thought
talk
about,
about
right?
that. Yeah, or you was crazy.
Or you was crazy.
Yeah.
It was never, I have this emotional trauma and I want to actually go in and talk to somebody, and deal with this so that I can be whole for the next generation. It was, no, you crazy. Go see your therapist. You crazy. Go get your meds. You crazy. And it's like people can have an imbalance, right? And not be crazy.
Right.
Depression is a real thing, and so is anxiety. And not only is anxiety a learned behavior, but it's also a chemical imbalance, just like depression. So we shouldn't be looking at people and telling them that they're less than because they're actually trying to do something to better themselves.
Do you see? Like I said, I lived in Cleveland, Avon Lake. I love Cleveland. I like the nightlife. I love the people there. I mean, it's a great city.
Yeah,
But it is almost like Atlanta, Black Hollywood, just Midwest. Have you seen an increase in what's been the ratio between women of color and men of color coming to see you? Has there been an increase, a decrease? Because, like you said earlier, and I know firsthand exactly what you're saying, it's been a stigma that's been so deeply rooted and woven in the fiber to even, and a lot of people don't do it because I think even the employers say, you know, this can jeopardize your job. And a lot of people won't go there for fear of being terminated for their job. Oh, we see here that you had a mental breakdown. You know, we are not qualified to run the thing. You know what I mean? So, what have you seen on your end with the women and the men?
I will say that I have a higher percentage of women that come to me than individual males. Not to say that I don't have African American males, on my client load as well, but it is 100% disproportionate. I do see a lot of couples,
Mm-hmm.
come in, and a lot of times it'll be because the female says we need to get counseling before X, Y, and Z happens, right? If you want to do this, we have to go to counseling. And so then the male comes, with the female into counseling, but then it ends up being an experience that doesn't just transform the couple, but transforms the individuals
Mm-hmm.
as well.
When you're dealing with, I'm just going on my journey.
Right, right.
You know, like my hat is definitely off to all the therapists because I'm going by what I know I put on their plate, and I'm thinking to myself the more I got to know my therapist. My first therapist was Dr. Santa Maria, Ross Santa Maria, that lives in Cleveland, and then my current therapist is Steve Cooper. And I remember saying, Jesus Christ, how do you guys deal with listening to people shit every day? You know what I mean? Like seriously. But how difficult is it? You know, like what's the fine line between individuals, like even a couple, when they come into your thing, this person saying, well, you're not listening, you don't do this, how do you really navigate? It's not a right or wrong, but how do you get them to see the bigger picture that what they're dealing with?
The first thing is that the great thing about me as a third party is I have objectivity they don't have. Why? So I'm not emotionally involved in any of that.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'm able to just look at the content, right? And as I look at the content, I watch for pattern. And so then I focus around the pattern because the pattern is what's causing the continual disruption.
Okay.
And so then we approach the pattern of behavior, get down to the bottom of where that pattern is coming from, specifically in communication, right? Lack of validation, I see so much. Lack of validation, no reflective listening, and being able to apologize and resolve conflict in a meaningful way. There's a lot of defensiveness that I see. And I tell people all the time, you might speak English and your partner might speak English, but you all did not come from the same home. Mm-hmm. You didn't come from the same home. You didn't see the same thing. You don't have the same experiences. So you're both speaking a different dialect.
Do you deal with a lot of I call them the sins, abandonment issues, deep in trauma? You've mentioned validation. How much of this do you have to go back into their childhood? Because this is something I learned from my therapist when I realized what my trauma was and what made me lock down. I knew what my triggers were, but something that I remember sharing with him, I should know. And you can't use this philosophy because unless you go to therapy and know what your traumas are, it doesn't work. But I always told him it would be cool if I knew what everybody's trauma was. If she was suffering from abandonment issues, if he was suffering from this, and that way I can have the tools. I think everybody should have the tools to be able to understand what everybody's trauma is. I think it might make the world a little bit more sympathetic because, like you said, I don't know what went on in your house. You don't know what went on in my house. What's your theory on that?
I mean, at the end of the day, we can sympathize, but there's things that we're just not going to know because we haven't experienced it. So when you're looking at someone's trauma, like you talk about someone that might have abandonment issues, right? Mm-hmm. I deal with people that have abandonment issues all the time. A lot of times that contributes to their style of attachment, right? There's anxious attachment, there's anxious avoidant attachment, and then there's secure attachment. Well, if I'm someone that has abandonment issues, so to speak, right, then I'm anxious with my partner all the time because I'm always scared that my partner is going to leave me. Mm. So even if my partner knows that I have abandonment issues, that's not going to fix the problem, right? Because my partner is still a human being that also needs their own space. Okay. And what I'm doing is unhealthy. Okay. So I still would have to go through the process of dealing with that trauma with a therapist and getting to a point where I realize my value as a person and what I'm bringing into the relationship and being okay standing on my own so that I can want to be with my partner versus needing to be with my partner. It's nice if my partner knows that I have abandonment issues. However, it doesn't make my behavior any less unhealthy.
Right. Before we wrap up, we wasn't planning on going this deep. We went pretty deep.
That's what I do.
before we wrap up, what's you got so many things going on. What's your end game for people? The bottom line is you're a caregiver, so to speak. You want to see the world healthy, not just in Cleveland, but all over. What's your end game here? What's your message with the people?
Man, I've never really thought of an end game, right? Because my thought is I want to impact as many people as positively as I can. If I can tell you something that helps you talk to your husband or your wife, if I can change the way that you see gender roles so that you understand that if you're a man, but you don't make as much money financially, you're just as valuable as a woman who may make money but is not submissive, right? And helping people to understand that individuality is what it's about. Understanding you, understanding your strengths and what you bring to the table versus what society tells you you're supposed to be. If I can help one person just love themselves a little bit more, I've done my job.
That's damage control out of this world. Tell me about the new podcast, a little brief on the podcast, how the people can listen to it, subscribe, like, and a little bit about your radio show before we sign off.
Absolutely. So my podcast is Supportive Advice Live, and it is on YouTube. It is on Facebook, and it is on Insta. It's everywhere, right? It's also, so if you ever want to listen to it on Google Play, Apple, and all that jazz, Supportive Advice Live, you can find us right there. Also, Damage Control.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to hear it, it is on Mondays at 2 o'clock every week on 95.9 WOVU Cleveland. And if you're not in Cleveland, you can still listen because we have an app for that, right?
Okay.
And you can also go on www.wovu.org.
When people are listening to these two platforms, what kind of information and stories are they going to get from the two, from Damage Control and the podcast? What kind of stories would they be listening to?
So as far as the podcast is concerned, which comes on Thursdays at 6, by the way, it's interactive, right?
Okay.
So any questions that come in, I literally answer questions, therapy questions right there on the spot.
I love
right?
that.
Yes. So it's like, it's giving a platform for people who might not be able to afford therapy, people who might, be leery of it, but, maybe have questions. It gives them an opportunity to be heard right then.
I think I got 4 in your inbox. It's called XXX.
Oh, really?
I don't want to give my name out, but you can comment on it. And then what's the other one about? What's Damage Control about?
So Damage Control, likewise, it has 3 segments, right? It has Relationship RX, and that is when people, they send me information questions via email, or they send them to www.supportiveadvice.com/damage control. And I read those questions off and I give advice free, right? Right on the air. And then we have what's called Listener Spotlight. And that's when people actually call in and I take their calls live.
Wow.
So they call it to 216-271-0959. And I take their calls live on air. And then the third segment is called Lyrical Detachment. And that is when I play a song that we all love, right? And I put it on a chopping block and I talk about what's healthy about it, what's unhealthy about it from a therapeutic perspective.
What kind of songs? What kind of music?
Well, I typically have a lot of, R&B or hip hop, things like that, but all genres of music are welcome. People can always submit songs to me, again, at www.supportiveadvice.com/damage control. And I'll take the song, I'll listen to it. I listen for cues, healthy and, and unhealthy, what is projecting to us as a whole, as a society. And I play the song and we talk about it.
How can the viewers reach out to you for more information in your services?
People can reach out to me by going onto my website at www.supportiveadvice.com. And you can always email me as well at Aqueelah Wheatley. Yep, you heard me. Aqueelah Wheatley at supportiveadvice.
You better spell that name.
Yeah, bear with me, guys. AQUEELAH Wheatley, WHEATLEY at supportiveadvice.com.
Thank you so much for taking the time out to bless me with your presence, bless me with your information, bless the audience with this kind of information. Guys, please reach out, support. That's what we're about, providing information, staying in that beast frame of mind. Before we leave, I want you to leave the viewers with that beast drive that you got. And on top of that, tell them what that name actually means. That's a beautiful name. I never heard it, but it's really beautiful.
The name Aqueelah is actually Arabic, and it means the intelligent one. And so I try to embody that, in everything that I do by spreading wisdom and spreading knowledge, specifically about how to be a cohesive unit.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Creighton show.